Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop. Today we are in episode 3 of our hardtop build for our 29-foot center console. And more specifically, we're building the plug, which is the mold for the mold, and then we're gonna build the part. So this is an in-depth tutorial, and you guys seem to be really enjoying what we're doing so far. But when y'all left off in episode 2, we had resin coated our foam cord piece here that is a replica or a facsimile of our hardtop. And I wanted to show you folks some of the tools that we're going to be using in this next phase. So we're kind of past the building it up with the wood frame and thickening it with the 1.5 2-pound density core, and now we're getting into the sanding. And I've actually started sanding a little bit already on these edges. You can see the difference between the glossy finish and the sanded surface. And I've been doing most of that with a 40 grit, just a little electric DeWalt, which again, for you DIYers at home, a readily available tool you can pick up at all the big box like the Home Depot and Lowe's and whatnot. But we may also be using some specialty sanders. Like that is a 6-inch dual action or DA from Hutchins, which Hutchins makes really good power tools. And this is a big inline Hutchins as well when you're fairing big long surfaces. And we may be using a little DeWalt grinder just to kind of skim some of these edges off. So I want to show you folks how we're going to do that. Now obviously some glasses and a mask and some PPE are probably a good idea. And when I had started, I had some fans moving here. I had one fan pushing and one fan pulling air out of the shop there. And that's probably a good idea if you're going to do this at home. Just makes it more enjoyable. And just to recap a little bit, when we were laminating, I wanted to show in episode 2 of this build how there are different resins that can be used in conjunction with one another. And the last resin that we finished off with was the DCPD Ortho Blend. And one of the reasons I used it is because when it cures, it does not remain tacky at all on the surface. As a matter of fact, I want to show an example. I've sanded all the way around the edges of this top already with this piece of sandpaper. And you can see it is free and clear. There's no material on it. Now, I've got another part I'm building. This is actually a seat back made out of Kusa that I'm using for our, it's gonna be the seat back on our big 29 over there. It's kind of cool. I've got some little aluminum pipe work and we're gonna be doing some jump seats back there. But I was sanding, this is an ISO laminating resin, and look at what it will do to your paper when you sand it. Now you can sand it. If you look there, you can see it's sanded, but it will gum up your paper. So that is one of the reasons that we finished out with the DCPD blend on this particular part, is because it does not remain tacky. So just to show you folks what I was doing, we were going around these edges with this little orbital sander. Just working this first plane or this first face. Then I came back around and did a little bit of work on that face, and then we came back here on this edge and we did a series of passes. Just to get to this point. And you can see here, this has already been sanded. This area here has not, that transition. So like we were doing previously, when you're doing this kind of work, I will tend to move all around. We don't just stay in one spot all the time and get it perfect. We tend to get like one facet and then another facet, another edge, and I'm gonna be continually moving around the boat. So I'm gonna put on a little bit of PPE and do a little bit of sanding for you folks and kind of show you in a little more detail on some of these different tools, how they might work. All right, folks, we're using a 40 grit stick it. Just like so. And using the 3M Secure Click mask. I really like this one. It's really comfortable, does a nice job. All right, so here we go. That that makes pretty quick work of it. And again, not a super expensive tool. Now, if you've got a good sized compressor in the shop and you prefer the air tools, the Hutchins is really, really nice. But again, a lot of you folks out there watching, maybe DIYers, that's about a $250, $300 air tool. I think these are 50 or 60 bucks or so. Now, one of the other things y'all have seen me using a lot is just the 3M sanding blocks. That's the Hook It sanding block, the 05687. And y'all notice I did a series of passes. I worked my way all the way down, and I came back and did a real nice kind of roll over all the edges. And a lot of times I will come back with a block and do a handful of passes as well. And that'll help really screw up that surface. Now, with the DCPD resin, it's kind of like resin that you've added wax to. It has to be sanded because it dries so slick and hard that any subsequent materials may not stick to it. So that's why we're going ahead and we're sanding this top very thoroughly. And that's also, obviously, it's taking out quite a few of those ripples and whatnot. And we've got some interesting materials I'm going to be using, some stuff y'all haven't seen me use on the channel yet. And one of the products is made by Evercoat. That is a polyester glazing putty, and it's basically like a body filler, but it's a very fine body filler. So any little pinholes or imperfections we have around this edge, we're gonna be working that in. And then we got some really cool materials from Orca Composites. This is like a high build, a sanding primer, and then we got a gray surface primer, which will actually be the surface or the finished surface of our plug, which is again the mold for the mold. Okay folks, we're back into it. I ended up using our little high-speed grinder with like a 36 grit, pretty aggressive disc on there to kind of go over and just do a knockdown or a skim. So I kind of skimmed this over, went back this way and that way, and you can see there's still some little low spots and divots in there, and you can kind of see those grinder marks. And then I've already followed that on this side with our DA and more of the 40 grit. And you can see the difference in sheen. I hope you can see that there's more imperfections on this side. But on this side, we've got it pretty darn good. Now, I don't really expect to get it like perfect. You don't have to get every one of these little divots out of there. But being that it's a DCPD resin, which is pretty slick, I do want to get a little bit of texture everywhere because we're going to be following this with like some glazing putty and then some primers, and they need a little bit of surface on there so that they can bite. Okay, so we have been sanding away, and you can see what the surface should look like when you're all done. We skimmed over that with mostly 40 grit. I wanted a pretty aggressive tooth or a bite on that. And there's still a few little divots in there. If you look really close, you can see where it's slightly darker. That would be a low spot. Now what I got my Gatorade bottle with the little hole in the top that we use for dispensing acetone. And I got one of the red Scotch-Brite pads. And you can see over here, I have already gone over this surface with some acetone and a Scotch-Brite pad, and you can see the difference in the two. But I want to demonstrate for you folks. Obviously, if you're doing this kind of stuff, the acetone especially, it's a good idea to have a good mask on and some eye protection. And I just want to demonstrate just for a minute or two. This little dispenser works so good. And we're just going to get a nice thorough scrub. That's going to get down in any of those little divots. We want to really put a good surface on this for our primer and our fillers. Now remember, acetone is highly flammable. Obviously you want to be careful when working with acetone.
Yeah, that's gonna get that surface really nice and clean. And the Scotch-Brite pad will get down in any of those little divots and put a little surface on that, or a little texture, so that our putties and fillers will stick properly. Yes, I'm gonna make one more pass just to be good and thorough. Proper preparation is the key. Want to be sure you prepare the surface very thoroughly, and that is the key to your putties and fillers looking really nice. Oh yeah. All right, and I'm gonna chase that to wipe off any dust residue with your good old shop towels. While this is still damp, can pick up some of the residue that may be on the surface there. Sanding residue mostly. We're trying to pick up any residual dust that may be on the surface. A little bit there. All right. Woohoo! That's about what it should look like. Lots of sanding, lots of wiping down. I'm pretty happy with that. We're gonna get ready for the next phase. So we've got our surface all prepped and we're ready to move on to our Evercoat. That is a polyester glazing putty. I've got about a 4-inch diameter batch there, and I'm gonna get ready to catalyze that. I just used a tube catalyst, and as a good rule of thumb, like one line across a circular batch like that is gonna be about right. And this is it's a real smooth and real fine putty. I really like it for filling little pinholes and little irregularities. It's not meant to build in a heavy, super thick amount. It's kind of, like it says, like a glazing or like a finishing putty. And folks, I'm gonna try to do a really good job of linking a description, so all the products that we're using in our video and videos should be available to you guys, like through Amazon and whatnot. And any of those products you guys purchase, that helps kind of support the channel and what we do. So, and again, I want to thank everybody that's been watching. It means a lot to me. I'm glad that you are finding the videos helpful and useful, and I do appreciate all your nice comments that you folks have been sending here lately. So what we've got here, this face had a few little irregularities right along in here. They're probably going to be a little tricky to see on the camera. But what I'm going to do is just start, and I'm just going to go ahead and glaze the whole front of this panel here. A lot of times I just like to get some material on there, and then we'll make a couple passes back and forth. This is not a material I use all the time, but for this kind of stuff where fine details and quality work are important, I like it. There, I'm going to pick up that material there. Sometimes you have to make more than one pass. You kind of have to know when good enough is good enough is good enough. I'm going to try to get a little bit on this little edge there. Sometimes just getting a little bit on your blade and kind of coming at an angle, delivering it that way, is a good way to get material on a fine line. This is a little trickier stuff. Kind of like body work. You guys, again, that do maybe do sheetrock or drywall work or any kind of auto body work, this ought to be a pretty natural fit for folks that do that kind of stuff. All right, I'll draw one. And sometimes it's okay if you just have a little hard ridge of material in there. This stuff sands quite well. Pretty easy to come back rather than trying to get it just absolutely perfect. Sometimes it's better to leave a little ridge of material and come back and sand it. And folks, if you don't live in the South and don't know what a yellow fly is, that is a yellow fly. And that's, yikes. Sorry about that, that was gruesome. So if you see me and my cameraman dancing around a little bit, yellow flies are chasing us right now. That's kind of one of the things of living in the South. We've always got some kind of bug, it seems like, chasing us down. And our temperatures are climbing, so our putties and fillers are going to be kicking a little bit faster than they would in cooler weather. I won't lie, man. I'm already missing the cooler months of the year. All right, I'm just going to clean a little bit. And that should be just fine. Again, it does not have to be perfect. And y'all can see this stuff kicks off fast. Now, I don't normally like to lose material, but you can see how quickly that went. Now, I put one line across our batch there, and I wasn't able to keep up with it. It kicked faster than I could use it. So on the next batch, I'm going to reduce the amount of catalyst a little bit, and you can do the same. You don't want to go too low, but when it's kicking off faster than you can use it, either mix a smaller batch or put a little less catalyst in there. Okay, so check it out, folks. We've got our skim coat of the glazing putty on there, and I've already started to knock that down a bit. So we're just putting a very light coat on there. So I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of how I would do this. Gotta get my apparatus on. Here we go. If you folks check this out real closely, you can see where there's a little more filler there. Those were some of those subtle low spots there in the fiberglass, and that's kind of what this material is, just trying to knock this down. Now it dries hard and fast, so it's like as soon as you've gotten this material on there, I literally just stopped applying it a few minutes ago, and you can come back and you can hit it. And I'm using a fairly aggressive 40 grit paper on our electric sander, and you can see it's taking it down pretty rapidly. I'm gonna go ahead and skim this before we call it an evening, and that's gonna put me in a really good place tomorrow to pick up things. Okay folks, so we have finished up most of the sanding with our little electric DeWalt, and we were using a 40 grit stick it pad on there, pretty aggressive to just do the knockdown. But it's interesting, if you look at how clean that pad is, there's no gummed up paper. That is because we were using that DCPD Ortho blend as our last couple of coats. And one of the good things about it, again, is it dries very hard and kind of tack free. The only thing you got to be careful of is that you can't recoat over it after any length of time. You've got to put a nice aggressive texture on it, but if you know you're going to be sanding it, that's a great material to finish. Obviously, if you wanted to upgrade, as a material recap, you guys could use the Hutchins 6-inch, and we're doing some block sanding and fairing right now, some detail sanding after we've knocked everything down with our DA. And it's hard to beat a long board or a block for this kind of work where you're making good long passes, just nice and smooth. We got that one facet that's like at 22 degrees, and then we're holding the block nice and flat here on this other little facet. And then sometimes we'll even take one of the smaller 3M blocks, wrap it, and you're just gonna knock those little burrs and lips and edges off the bottom. And remember, you want to do this real uniformly. I don't just get one area perfect and then move to the next. I tend to kind of get the flats and then the facet and then the other little facet and work in phases like that. Now I wanted to show you folks an option as well. Last night we used the Evercoat. We used a glazing putty, which works really good for filling little pinholes and little small imperfections, even if you're doing some like paint work at home and you getting ready to spray and you notice there's some little tiny pinholes. And that's kind of what we were using here. There are little low spots in the gel coat, and everywhere you see where it's kind of extra white, there was a little bit of a low. But not everybody's going to carry this one. And I know some of you folks that have watched some of our gel coat videos in the past, the Evercoat, the Formula 27 is a good alternative. It doesn't dry as hard as this, and it actually has a little more work time. It might be a little more forgiving for folks that are like DIYers, or maybe if you haven't worked with this kind of putty. And this is also really good for gel coat repair if you have a white boat, because it uses a white paste catalyst. And so when you mix it up, it's going to be a white filler versus an off color. This one has a blue paste catalyst, and so you're going to get a blue tint or a light blue tint to the filler. So always a good idea to put a good mask on. Now, one more option for you folks, if you're doing some heavy duty, y'all may have seen me use this. This is another Hutchins, a big air inline. We can put 3 pads on this one versus just the one with the DA. And I'm gonna demonstrate for you folks. Now, when we were building the mold for our 29, it was money well spent to buy something like that. And you're not gonna believe, we're gonna make a little dust here. Check this out. Now that is the ticket if you're doing a lot of this kind of work, or if you were, say, building a mold or a plug or a boat. I mean, and it's a Hutchins. I'm gonna try really hard to do a better job too, folks, of putting links below the video description. So the stuff that we're using on here, you don't have to go searching all over the world to find it. You can be able to find it right here. And that does help support the channel a little bit too. So we can do more of this kind of stuff for you folks. So I'm gonna get after this thing, clear some of this stuff off, get after the final phase of fairing, and then we're moving right on over some new materials you guys have not seen me use again. The Orca composites. That's a gray, like a high build sanding primer, and then a finishing primer that can be buffed and polished to like a mirror-like shine. It's good stuff. So one thing I wanted to be sure to point out to you folks, if I haven't already, is when we are sanding on a surface like this, I always sand in like a search grid. So when I say search grid, that means I'm gonna go up and down. I'm gonna demonstrate. And I may go a couple feet, and then I'm gonna turn and go. Now there's a third option. A lot of times if we're working on a curved surface, you can even do a diagonal stroke. You just want to remember not to stay in the same groove over and over again, because you'll cut a track or a groove into the surface. And the goal of this is to get this, what in the boat world we call fair, like really smooth. Now another thing that's crazy is your eyes can see certain things, but your hands can feel irregularities. And a lot of times you'll see body work guys, you can use your hand, and a lot of times it's amazing. You can feel little ripples, little hills and valleys, and you can come back. Now there's another product you guys have seen us use in the past as well. 3M makes a dry guide coat, and this stuff can basically go on here, and it makes like a dark powder, so you can see where you've been, and when you go to sand it, it'll show little highs and lows. And it'll reveal sometimes little irregularities in the surface. You can see it's a little dark there, it's a little lighter there. Now honestly, I use the guide coat a little bit more for when I'm personally doing the more finer, the more detailed work. But again, if you're new to this, and just to get in the habit of covering it very thoroughly, you do not want to be one of these people that just jumps around all over the place, and there's no real pattern to what you're doing, because you are going to end up missing some spots if that's what you do. So check this out, folks. Look right here. This is what the finished product ready for our primer should look like. Now, we went over that with 80 grit all the way around the perimeter. We kind of detailed all these little edges and cleaned everything up really nice. And now is the time, prior to getting ready for the primer, we vacuumed all the dust off of there, and gonna put a little bit of acetone on there. Now sometimes we did run that air tool, that big Hutchins, and sometimes you'll have a little bit of air tool residue, or quite honestly, you'll notice I wear rubber gloves all the time, but your body, you produce sweat and oil if it's hot. It's always just a good idea to clean the surface, and acetone is hard to beat for that. So I'm gonna put my good respirator on. I'm gonna kind of just show you guys and gals. Once again, I kind of like to just wet everything ahead of the cloth there. We go back and forth, side to side. Real nice search pattern, just like so. We kind of wipe it till it looks good. Usually 2 passes is going to be enough. So we're using the gray sanding primer. It's important to remember the sanding primer is a primer you would use do a little more sanding with. It's got more material in it. It's kind of a high build. I went ahead and poured up right at 16 ounces or just slightly over. And generally this material acts a lot like gel coat would, in that you can thin it a little bit if you want with some styrene monomer. I actually already did that in the can. So I opened the can, I added 2 or 3%. You probably can go up to about 5% or so. And I mixed it very thoroughly. Sometimes sanding primers have a lot of sediment in the bottom, and you got to be sure to really stir them up and use a good drill mixer. I'm going to go with about 7 cc's or so of catalyst, because it is fairly warm today. We've got about 85-degree temps, and this stuff again behaves a lot like gel coat, so you don't have a terribly long time. And we're going to do multiple passes. I'm going with the dyed catalyst in this one. You can use a clear, but you can see the red. Even when you use the red, it kind of dispenses in there. It gives it a slight pink look, but I like it because I know that it's thoroughly mixed. And we're just using a fairly inexpensive, that's a HVLP, that's just a cup gun. And that is one that we sourced at our local Lowe's. That's about a $75 or $80 gun. It's kind of what I call like a primer gun. It's not anything super expensive or super fancy, which you don't necessarily you don't necessarily need for this kind of mix. So generally a minute or two of mix time, or until you thoroughly got it. I had a comment the other day, someone said, why did you shorten up on the mix time? Well, once you get proficient at it, you can usually mix stuff a little bit faster, but I recommend, if you're a DIYer, kind of just beginning, about 2 minutes of mix time. But the longer you mix, the less time you have to spray. So it can be a balancing act. Now obviously we're gonna run this through a strainer, and I've already done some adjustments to my gun. If you've never sprayed before, I might have to do a whole video on that. You can roll or brush this material on, but I prefer to spray it if possible. It's gonna be a little smoother in the application, and I wanna see how it does in this particular gun. You want plenty of good airflow. You want a good mask. I know I've been talking about this one a lot, the 3M, the Secure Click, that 803 SD. And I wear a large. A lot of people may not even realize there's different sizes, but if I wear one too small, it pinches on the bridge of my nose. So if you're a full-size guy, you might want to get a large. They offer mediums and smalls. Small would be all for but very, very small, petite people. All right, now we got to get to spraying. I've already done some adjustment on this thing. We got our vent open here, made sure we got good clean air already, and we're gonna get this mask on and get about a 2 mil coat, just kind of a tack coat on this thing. All right, let's see how she looks. So we got our first kind of a mist coat on there. It's a light coat, like 2 mils, which is not very much. Just got real light coverage. We had enough to kind of start on the back and come back a little ways. But we've got another batch in the mix right now. We made it all the way around there, but I want to go heavier on the next coat. So instead of 16 ounces, we're doing a 24 ounce, or maybe just a touch more than 24 ounces, more like 25 or so. And it's quite hot today down here, so I'm gonna half again on the catalyst. We're probably going somewhere in that, about 12 cc's or so. But before I add the catalyst, this gun doesn't have a real big tip on it, and this material is pretty high in solids. So I'm gonna thin this just a bit. We're gonna add some of the styrene monomer, and just gonna give it a splash there. Generally, being similar to gel coat, you normally we don't like to do anything more than about 5% or so. You might be able to go slightly more than that if you wanted to. And I'm gonna go ahead and mix that in just a bit, but I'm gonna catalyze to the volume of the original primer. So that's kind of what really matters the most. And we'll go ahead in with our dyed catalyst there. Now folks, if you've never used a spray gun before, there are some adjustments on the spray gun. You got your air control, and you got your fan, and you got your material volume. And I may even do a video on that, but it's probably not a bad idea if you're interested in this stuff to just buy an inexpensive spray gun at first and just kind of play around with stuff. It's also important to remember that this material will get hard. It doesn't have a very long pot life. So like once you've mixed it, you need to get it in the cup, and then you need to get it out of the gun pretty rapidly. And there are some good directions here on the back as well, as far as recommended application and air pressure and all that good stuff. But don't let that kind of worry you. A lot of times, if you've never done this, it can kind of freak you out a little bit, and you think, well man, I've never done this, I don't know what all this means. But basically, you just want good clean air, you want a good volume of air, and it's a good idea to practice on some stuff. You might want to get something less expensive than what we're dealing with here and try that first. All right, so that should be a good mix. And remember with this material, folks, there is never a time when you do not add catalyst. There's always going to be an activator. I get that question sometimes in the comments below. Should I put catalyst on the last coat of gel coat, or should I put catalyst in the last coat of resin? The answer is yes. You always have to catalyze any of these polyester and vinyl ester epoxy materials. They're not like a one-part paint. They need to be catalyzed or activated to work properly. If you don't do that, they will not. So what I'm doing here on my mixing cup, I'm going to take some of the acetone from my previous clean out of the gun, and I'm going to put that in my mixing cup there and let that be soaking, because if you don't, the stuff will start to harden in the cup. So I'm going to let that kind of just rest right there. We've got quite a full cup. It's a good idea to have a good trash bin handy. I'm going to throw that strainer away once we've run one batch through it. And I'm looking for my cup. Logan, do you see my cap? Oh, here it is. That happens sometimes. I got my acetone in my bucket there, and I like to be sure you've got the little vent open as well so that this thing can breathe. Otherwise, you'll get like an airlock or a vapor lock on this thing. All right. We're just gonna pick up where we left off. You can see we kind of stopped right along in here. So I'm gonna pick up that same general area. A little heavier pass this time. You guys and gals will notice also when I'm spraying, I'm lifting off on the trigger at the end of each stroke. That'll kind of help feather the material out and you'll get a better product. Okay. Come over here to this side. Pick up where we left off. We left off right along in here. You can kind of see the change. Here we go. Now I want to show you folks a little trick. Sometimes it can be tricky pouring this liquid out of a gallon container into a smaller container. And it is quite okay. A lot of times we will actually ladle this out if you have concerns about getting paint everywhere and spilling this primer. It is quite okay to just ladle it out of the gallon rather than pouring it, which I know there's tools and there's different spouts and things that will help you with this, and it may not concern you. You may just want to go for it, but a lot of the time when you have a big full gallon of this material and you go to pour it, you're going to get spillage. And we're going for, again, about 24 ounces. That was about right on that last batch there. So I'm pretty happy with that. And it sprayed a lot better when I reduced it a little bit more. So we've already squeezed out our catalyst according to the 24 ounces. And I'm just gonna give this another little splash of the styrene monomer and stir that in. Now obviously, again, when you're doing this, you would want to wear your mask, but for the sake of audio quality and what we're doing here, I'm not. But when I'm spraying, absolutely, because that stuff's airborne and you want good airflow through your shop. And if you have a paint booth or something, that would be even better. This is really cool stuff though. This has a lot of solids in it, and it's really good for filling in scratches and little pinholes and whatnot in the mold surface. And then we're going to follow that with the surface primer. Is going to be a harder, denser material. It's more for like wet sanding and polishing. Okay, here we go with the MEKP. And again, we did about 12, 13 cc's or so. Just remember, with these kind of materials, you have a range of percentages that you can work with. They say on the can up to like 2%, which would be like 20 cc's per quart, but that's at 77 degrees, which would be kind of their baseline that they run the test on this stuff on. But it's in the mid 80s here in the shop today, and when you go up almost 10 more degrees in air temp, you can back off of the catalyst a good bit. If you folks are enjoying what we're doing here, be sure again to comment, like, share. We really want to grow the channel, and the support from everyone has been tremendous. I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you folks are doing. And again, we will have links below the video description for all the products we're using, and you folks can get exactly what we're using here in the boat shop for your own project. Sometimes folks don't even know these kind of products exist, but they sure can make doing these kind of these specialty projects work a lot better. Now, I had a little bit of acetone sitting in my gun between batches. We cleaned the gun, let a little bit of acetone sit in there. I'm gonna blow out any residual. Then we're ready to load the gun back up. Cleaning your gun between coats is very important, folks. The pot life on this material is not that long, and I haven't showed it every time I've done it, but every time we finished a coat, I have come back and we flush the gun with acetone, rinse it real well, and I'll leave a little bit of acetone sitting in the gun while we're waiting between batches. Or else you will come back and your gun will be froze up. That is why I like a fairly inexpensive gun for shooting primer like this. There's no point in using a $500, $600, $700 spray gun for just shooting primer. And it's a good place, it's a good entry point to learn. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take some of this acetone, I'm gonna pour it back into our mixing cup there. Rinse the edges just a little bit so that doesn't kick off on us, and we can leave that alone. We'll come back and finish it up here in a second. Nice to have a work table too, folks. Everything organized and ready to go. We'll clean that little bit of material off the lip so it doesn't get on our cap. The more you do this, the better you're gonna get. That's the good thing about spraying these kind of primers, is they're made to be sanded anyway. So if you get a run or a drip or something, not a big deal. Not a big deal. Okay, so one other thing too, we sprayed, that last pass was across the panel. I'm gonna turn direction, and on this next pass, I'm gonna go lengthwise with the panel. And you can see that first coat is already packed off there. Sometimes you'll get little bits of bugs and little gnats in it. You can just wipe them off with your hand. All right, here we go. Little test shot. Looks good. All right, fixing to layer down. Here we go. All right, that pretty much does it. I think it looks pretty good. Okay, so we finished up with our spray, and we need to take care of this gun Very important. Now, a lot of times what I will do is I'll just take a little bit of acetone from the previous batch and run just a little bit through the gun there. Just get a little bit, clear the nozzle. Make sure you've got a little bit of material through. I'll kind of swoosh it around a little bit. We're just trying to get the heavy stuff out of there. I'm gonna go back. And we don't throw acetone away. There's different levels of clean when you're doing this. We one way or the other, we're going to use the acetone. So we kind of got the heaviest bits of material out of there. Sometimes I'll take a clean terry cloth towel and a little bit of acetone out of my squeeze bottle. We'll get a little bit of residue out of the cup. And again, all this stuff is catalyzed, so it's not like a lot of your household materials where you got a lot of time to work with it. You've got to kind of get after it. We've got a little bit of material there on our cap. Same deal, a little bit of acetone. Let's get that clean. And then follow me, folks. I'm telling you, having a good workspace is so critical. We've got our 5-gallon container of acetone, and I want to put some brand new, pristine, really nice and clean acetone and run through the gun at this point. Make sure, I've obviously got gloves on. You can use a brush, but a lot of times just make sure the nozzle is good. Cap back on. Now everybody's got a different procedure. I'm sure you pros out there that are watching, you have your own way of cleaning your gun. And obviously if you have a very expensive gun, you're probably gonna take a little better care of it. But you'd be surprised at what you can get done with just an inexpensive gun like this, especially if you're new to doing this kind of work. So I'm gonna let that soak for just a minute. Let's come over here and look. That's 3 good coats. I believe we've got good coverage. I had a couple little spots, had to come back and touch up. Sometimes you get some little pinholes and you can give it just a few little shots after 2 or 3 coats. This needs to cure for about 24 hours or so. And that's really works out good actually, because we have a fishing charter tomorrow. So I'm excited. We're gonna get out in the Gulf. The weather's clearing out and we can go catch some big fish. We're gonna let this cure overnight. We're gonna hit this with a sander, get ready for our next primer coats. So 24 hours have passed, folks, and our primer has thoroughly cured. You can see here, this is in its raw state, kind of untouched, but me and my son have been doing some blocking over on this side. So we use this little 3M block all the time, and there's some fundamentals for fairing or blocking out big flat surfaces. Things may seem really flat and true, but this is the best way to get it thoroughly, completely flat and true. And what I usually like to do is start at the front, and I'll go in line from out to the side about as far as I can reach, and I will work my way all the way from front to back. Now once I've done that, a lot of times I will put on a diagonal pass. You're coming across diagonally. We're gonna go from back to front, and then we will start this way, and we will go diagonally that way from front to back. And to finish up, once we've made that pass, an inline pass. Notice I'm moving continually. And we'll move on just like that. If you look really close though, you can see some little areas that are slightly darker there, slightly darker there. Those are minuscule low spots, and we may even use some of the 3M, the guide coat here, and as we get just a little further along. Now obviously, if you got a little extra money and want to run it on a big compressor, you can run this big Hutchins air file, but the same deal. A lot of times we're going across, we'll go diagonally, we'll go diagonally, we go in line. You don't have to do it in that sequence, but you just want to change it up and be sure that you don't run it in the same groove. The primer though at this point is also a really good time for us to find little details or problems. So if you come over here, there were some little minor imperfections right along in here, and you can see I just drew a light pencil mark, and we're gonna come back and we're gonna add a little bit of the polyester, the glazing putty that we used initially. We've also got a few more. Come on over here, I'll see if I can show. Maybe there's like a little, there's a pinhole right there, and then there are a couple little imperfections. I don't know what happened there, but that's pretty noticeable. And so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna come in. Now's a really, really good time to add a little bit of filler. But what I did to these spots, I lightly sanded those areas that I'm gonna fill, and then wiped them down with a little bit of acetone, and I've got them marked with the pencil so I know where they are. All right, here we go, folks. A little bit of the glazing putty, and we're just gonna wipe it. Get that little divot if we can. This is excellent material for this kind of stuff, and the primer at this phase really helps us to kind of see where these little low spots might be on the mold. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point because this stuff sands quite easy. Same deal, there's a little pinhole right there. Gonna wipe it a few times. Sometimes you gotta come around multiple times to get everything that may be going on. There was a little bit of a low spot right there. You're just gonna have this kind of stuff. It doesn't mean you didn't do a good job. It's just, that's why you do multiple coats of primer and multiple coats of filler. You come back over and over again and work it till it's right. Work it till it's right. All right, folks. That's already starting to gel up. All right, we're gonna let that cure, knock that down, and be ready for our next coat of primer. We're blocking with our 3M block here. We're doing this facet. Nice and easy. What's great about this sanding primer is I've been blocking for an hour with that and not any gumming on it. So it's got air inhibitors in this that makes it so that it can be sanded without gumming up your sandpaper, which is why it's worth maybe investing in something like that if you're going to be building something like this. So we've got more sanding to go, but I just wanted to show you folks how there's obviously different techniques. We did the crosshatch on the top, but on these little edges, it's more or less just holding it nice and even. And we're gonna do the same thing for this little facet, this lip here. It's just gonna be a hold it 90 degrees to the other surface, and we're just gonna walk our way around. We're moving a little bit each time, keeping track of where you are and where you've been. And you wanna be looking to be sure all your edges and reveals stay very similar. A lot of times if you do these nice crisp lines, you can kind of see little variations if they're there. Remember, like you can see right here on this edge where I've sanded that flat and this flat, and it leaves out a little bit of an edge. And then we'll come back and touch that up, and then we'll come back and you can see like this corner here, we can make a couple passes lengthways. See how easy this material sands. And then you can also kind of come and roll over that corner a little bit. We can do it that way. That gives you that real nice crosshatch, and that is going to get it really nice and true. So we have moved on to using the big the big Hutchins inline. We did a ton of block sanding, and you can see over here, we've got a nice, you can kind of see that crosshatch pattern where we've been sanding one direction, then the other direction. But it's hard to beat an air tool or a dual action sander to put a nice, smooth, kind of uniform surface. So I kind of want to show you folks again at home what we're doing. If you got a big project, these aren't cheap tools, but they will save you a ton of time. And what's great, if you buy a quality tool, if you're done with your project, you want to sell it, you can still usually get most of your money back out of it. All right, so here we go. We're trying to take some of these cross hatches out of there. Here we go. You can see what a difference. I hope the camera picks that up. You see the lines, and then we got the little orbital marks. So that looks a lot better. And then we're just using the good old shop vac every few minutes. Just coming in here and sucking that up. Or if you got a helper, they can hold the vacuum near the sander, and that'll catch a lot of that dust. Check this finish out, folks. We have done all of our DA sanding, and we've vacuumed everything off. I'm gonna pan around and check out from, you can almost see some shine on this surface. I did come back around this with some 120 by hand and detail some of these corners and kind of soften things up a little bit, but I am pretty pleased with how she looks. So we are losing daylight rapidly. Normally I would recommend not spraying this late in the day, but we got weather coming tomorrow and the following day. So if we don't get this gray primer, now this is the gray surface primer that we're gonna be doing next. We just used the gray sanding primer, which is more of a high build. It's got some more volume in it so you can sand and shape. This is gonna be better for polishing and wet sanding and actually make a surface that we can pull a part off of. And I went ahead and poured up. We got about 26 ounces or so of product in there. And I'm gonna go ahead and catalyze that. We're going with about 14 or 15 cc's or so. It's fairly warm right now, but I can work pretty fast, and we're trying to get this kicked off and moved along. Need a good stirring stick. There you go. It's good to have everything ready. We've already got the air gun cleaned up. We've got the air compressor is up and ready to go. I am gonna add just a splash of the styrene monomer to thin this just a bit. It's gonna help it maybe 5%, 5 to 10% or so. But we're catalyzing by the volume of like the original primer. I'll work that in a little bit, and then we are using the dyed catalyst. It's the Norox MEKP 925. And remember folks, when working with almost everything we do, there's never a time when you wouldn't add a catalyst or a hardener or an activator to these materials. In goes the catalyst. Eye protection is always a good idea. And you want to mix this thoroughly. A lot of times you recommend a minute, at least a minute, closer to 2 minutes, but the more you do this, the better you're going to get at mixing it proficiently. The longer you mix, the better your mix is going to be, but you also have lost some of your pot life is what they call it. And this cures pretty quickly. You need to move right along. Always a good idea to run it through a strainer before you go into the gun. That's a pretty full pot. We're just going to do a real light, what they call a 2 mil tack coat And when it's hot weather like this, you can actually cut the recoat time down to like 5 to 10 minutes. If it's cooler weather, it needs to be like 20 minutes minimum between coats. But this stuff works really nice for pattern building, especially mold building, plug building. There are other uses for it too. We might get into that in some other episodes. Folks, talking about episodes, if you're enjoying what we're doing, again, remember to hit that subscribe button if you're already not subscribed. Like, share, comment, all that good stuff really helps. And yeah, I want to thank you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and checking out the channel. It means a lot to me for sure. All right, the cap goes on. Be sure, I want to leave this thing where it can vent and breathe. So I'm going to leave that unplugged. All right, yellow flies. Yikes. Live in the South. They're like biting deer flies down here. They're awful. All right, for 100% need a respirator. We have already wiped this down, blown it down nice and clean, but you're gonna want a respirator and some air movement when you're doing this. All right, folks, here we go. Remember, not terribly heavy, only 2 mils on the initial tack coat. Not too shabby. We're gonna give that a couple minutes and get ready for another coat. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes. Now the first pass we went across. The next pass I'm gonna go lengthwise. So here we go, folks. Yeah. That's all she is. Time for another batch. All right, folks, we got about 27 ounces poured up. 27, 28 ounces or so. I'm gonna give that a little, just a little splash. of styrene, and we're going with about 14 or 15 ounces, or 14 or 15 cc's rather, of our MEKP. And again, we'll be linking all of these. We'll have descriptions below the video for everything we're using. You guys, when y'all purchase stuff through our Amazon links and whatnot, that does help us do more of this kind of stuff, and we appreciate you guys doing that very much. Yeah, that's a pretty good cup full. All right, we've been starting from the front. We're going to start again. Last time we went long ways. Now we're going to go crossways again. Looks good. Full wet pass this time.
Okay folks, so we had finished up all of our spraying last night. We had something kind of crazy happen. There was like some kind of crazy bug bloom while we were finishing up the spraying. We actually had to come back this morning and shoot one more coat, but I want to show you guys what the finished product looks like. I am pretty pleased with that. I think she turned out nice. You can see all of our contours. This primer really does a nice job, and I call it a primer. I mean, it's a coating specifically made for what we're doing. And again, I kind of want to do a run through here of all the materials we used on this project, because we're kind of ending this phase, but we're using air dry coatings. This is the gray sanding primer, which this is the one that we used first. That's made by Orca Composites. And then we used the air dry coatings, the gray surface primer, which is the one that we did second. That's the coat that we sprayed last night. And then all throughout the build up here, obviously we used some of the ISO tooling, the polyester resin. The last coat, it was the DCPD blend, which it dries very tack free. It doesn't really have a wax in it, but it just dries really hard and it doesn't gum up your paper. And we also use some of your good old standard ortho polyester laminating resin, but that will stay tacky. So some of the earlier coats, we did it first and then we did the DCPD later. Now it's important to remember that the Orca Composites, the primers and the coatings that we use, the gray, it behaves and acts a lot like gel coat does. You can thin it with just a styrene monomer. We were thinning it. It does like a little bit of thinning. It seemed like around 5 to 10% or so. And then you're going to be activating that with your standard MEKP 925. That's by Norox, but any good high strength activator or MEKP is going to work. And then a lot of times we will dye ours, and that's our little container, and it'll make your catalyst red so that you can see when you're thoroughly mixed, because that is very important. And we were just using an inexpensive gravity feed, like a HVLP, like a $75 to $100 gun, which I kind of like for primers. That way if you have a little snafu while you're spraying, you're not messing up a very high dollar, you know, something you use for spraying all grip and whatnot. Now, we're moving on to another pretty exciting phase. We're going to be doing some wet sanding, and then we're going to be getting ready to use some of this fast cut by Aqua Blue, and then some of the Aqua Blue, the buffing and polishing compound. So one a little more aggressive, one a little bit softer. But I think that's going to be it for this episode. It's going to be multiple videos, but by the end of this series, you folks out there watching are going to know how to build your own hardtop, live well, console, maybe even your own boat. So I want y'all to know how much I appreciate everybody watching. It means a ton to me. The channel's been growing rapidly. Anything you guys can help, anything you can do to help me grow the channel, the more viewers, the more watch time we have, the more these kind of videos we can make. So it's Captain Joe here with Island Marine Charters, Fish Bump TV. As always, my amazing cameraman working hard behind the scenes, and we will catch you guys in the next episode.